I'm going to let our esteemed panel introduce themselves because they all have very interesting backgrounds that I could not possibly do justice. So I'm going to start with Dr. Sung.
All right. Okay. Nice meeting you guys. My name is Kyung. I have a PhD in electrical engineering and specialize in computer vision and machine learning and image processing. And since PhD, I was in the radiology more than 15 years. I'm actually running a research lab at UCLA in radiology. My lab is focusing on the development of new AI technology and medical imaging technologies. And I'm leading actually two NIH-funded projects. One is developing an AI in prostate cancer diagnosis, and the other is improving the AI readiness of the MRI data sets.
Thank you. Dr. Codari.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Marina Codari. I come from Arterys, a company working in the development of AI software for medical image processing, recently acquired by Tempus Labs, so now focusing also on precision medicine in the bigger spectrum. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. I have a PhD in integrative biomedical research, always work in medical image processing, applying AI over the spectrum. And before actually joining Arterys, I was also in academia. I was at Stanford. I was a postdoctoral researcher of the radiology department there. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Dr. Codari. Dr. Enzmann.
Hi, my name is Dr. Enzmann. I'm an MD. I'm the chair of radiology at UCLA. I trained at Stanford. I went to medical school there, did an internship there, radiology residency there. I went to UCSF and did a neuroradiology fellowship. So by training, I'm a neuroradiologist. I was a chairman at Northwestern before coming here and becoming a chair here. Obviously, I run the department, and one of the goals of our department is to be the most innovative radiology department in the country. So that's our goal, and as you can see from the presentations, we're well on our way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Enzmann. So AI and radiology is an extremely broad topic. And as Dina already mentioned and as Debbie mentioned earlier, significant portion of the innovation that's occurring in the space is in AI and radiology. So we're going to try to focus down our discussion just a little bit. So we're going to start with what problems are you solving or do you want to solve with AI and radiology? And some of the options are diagnosis, triage, efficiency, replacing radiologists altogether. Wherever you want to go, please take it away. We'll start with Dr. Sung.
Oh, all right. Thank you. So our lab is more on the technical development aspect. So we're actually interested in, first of all, the improving the workflow of the radiology interpretation process. So trying to improve the image quality by using a super resolution approach or improving the denoising of the image quality. Those are the kind of easier ways to use AI to improve overall image quality. And also even further, we are actually very interested in multi-scale integration of with the imaging and clinical and demographic information together to improve the diagnosis and prognosis. Those are kind of the two major areas, more the easier workflow enhancement versus the improving the diagnosis.
Thank you. Dr. Enzmann?
So just a comment about radiology. One of the goals of the department is, obviously we look at images, but the goal is to acquire images in a way so there's a maximum amount of information in the image that you can extract at a later time. So AI comes in at both ends. You can add information to the image, but also extract it when you actually read the image, interpret it. In terms of AI, obviously we're interested in it, but the first question I always ask, and it's come up already, what problems are you trying to solve? And before you really enter the AI sphere, that's something you have to define. As was pointed out, it can be used to improve diagnosis. It's currently being used in breast cancer to improve breast cancer detection and mammography. One important role is what I call triage. So in the emergency room, you obviously want to see the patients or the images that are most crucial, that have most immediate impact. So AI can help order the work list so you're seeing the most critical images at the top of the list and you see them first. you would like to improve efficiency and then also performance. On an efficiency side, I think the one mental note I make is in an image, obviously you take time, look at the image, and then you extract the information. So to me, AI helps if the amount of image content is able to be extracted in a minimum amount of time. So I use the information over time as kind of a heuristic to determine how helpful something is. And in terms of performance, as you all know, there's a critical shortage of virtually everything in healthcare. We're short of technologists, we're short of radiologists, we're actually short of machines, we're short of nurses. So one of the key features of AI is, can it help alleviate some of the shortages and improve the performance of the system overall?
Great. Before we get to the question with you, Dr. Codari, that is a question that I wanted to dive deeper into, was talking about how AI and radiology can help address some of these shortages, and especially the difference in the application between academic or large medical centers and community and rural hospitals. So perhaps, Dr. Codari, we can start with you to kind of expand on that before we talk a little bit more about some of the other topics.
Yeah, like you described 3 very different scenarios. Each one of them has peculiar necessities, like peculiar shortage. Like, for example, if you are in a tertiary academic center, you probably are not like in shortage of like expert like opinions, or like you have people that is highly specialized in treating very uncommon disease, so it's something that you would never face, while in a community center this is something that you might need like at least in the first stage for then triggering the patient to the correct like center in which will be treated like properly. So for example, triaging system can be very helpful when you have very high volume and a very high shortage of human, to help those humans are becoming more efficient in their task. That it's like the point. Like on the other way around, like for example, in high-end academic center, you may have people that are, you know, pushing the edge of the technology, and where it's there, you can actually try to see if you can push the edge of like going in the precision medicine like environment, and see if you can integrate those information that you try to enrich as much as possible during the acquisition, maybe through AI still, and see if you can help in predict patient prognosis or predict diagnosis. So I think the needs come very specific, you know, the need that you try to help with depends on this scenario. So that changed a lot. So I will say at least like democratization of some specific skills might be helpful in remote settings or community settings. Triaging skills are very helpful in those settings. You have detection skill, like tasks that can be very helpful when you have the burnout of like, I don't know, screening center that like collect patients from all over the places, but have like limited machines, limited people that have to handle very large volumes, and you want them to be, you know, to don't burn out also, because like even if you have few people, you don't want those people to burn out. So that's another area in which AI can help. So,
Dr. Enzmann, some comments on that, if you could add, about academic centers versus community hospitals and how AI is applied differently in those two settings when it comes to radiology.
Well, again, you have to ask yourself the question, what problem are you trying to solve? One problem that AI can help with is obviously academic and medical centers have a high expertise. They have deep knowledge in various specialties, so they are specially oriented. Community hospitals, because of the nature of the community they serve and the type of radiologists, they're more general radiologists, so they can benefit from a relationship with an academic medical center in terms of getting subspecialty knowledge for those unusual patients or cases that they otherwise might not have diagnostic expertise in. So as you know, when you train the machine learning algorithm, it's trained with experts. And my experience has been that the algorithm generally can try to match an expert's performance doesn't usually exceed the training set. It's usually not better than the expert. On the other hand, having an expert available in a rural setting is a dramatic increase in terms of the kind of quality of care you can perform or offer patients. So I think it offers expertise that normally might not be available in a rural setting.
Great, thank you. Dr. Sung, please.
Yeah, so one more thing is, so as Dr. Enzmann said, the academic centers has much higher expectations, so we tend to accumulate or collect the information as much as possible. What machine learning or AI can do really well is retrospectively, we can actually see the values of each information and then assessing yes and no with and without certain information. And then we can actually optimize certain protocols or certain standardization and recommending so that it can have actually better benefits to wider community, which doesn't have that resource. And then eventually we can actually cut down the cost based on the optimization too. So that's one. The second thing is actually triage related questions. So for example, for us, we've been actually working on prostate MRI for diagnosis, particularly when the multi-center trial came out and showing the benefit of using MRI is improving the detection of the prostate cancer for the biopsy. And then if you look at it, the number of imaging cases went up. So if you look at 5 years before and now, we pretty much doubled up the number of prostate MRI cases. So definitely, in terms of imaging cases, we have more cases coming up. But then if you look at the radiologists, we don't have much more recruiting. So definitely there is more demands coming up, but then we don't have many resources. So that being said, if you look at all the MRI, or particular prostate MRI, 30–40% of the cases ended up being negative. So we don't see anything. So triage has a lot of implication and opportunities there. And that basically gets rid of all this 30–40% of the cases don't need to be interpreted.
I'd love to talk more about what the public is expecting when it comes to AI and radiology, or what patients or physicians or hospitals are expecting, and what actually we're seeing, and what is the disconnect there. Perhaps Dr. Codari, if you could start, since especially you're in the market with a radiology AI startup.
Yeah, so if you think about like the cycle of the life of technology, you know, it's a curve that has a very specific shape, which start with a lot of expectations. And I think we pass that peak right now. Like 2 or 3 years ago, there were probably also like unrealistic expectation or fears even, like as you started the conversation, will the radiologist be replaced? There was a lot of like publication even in the academia about that. Like I think we passed that peak right now, and we have more knowledge just because we have more evidence. Since there are some products in the market right now that have been deployed, you know, for a couple of years, also the radiologists, or at least the one that I interacted with, really know what they are expecting by the technology. Well, at the beginning, they were curious about the technology. Now, the knowledge, also on the clinical side, it's more mature. There is more evidence. We know the bias. We know the way of improving. And, you know, also on we basically know more what to expect, in my opinion. And, you know, it has been an evolution. Those devices started from being image processing tool for the majority, helping radiologists in tedious tasks, for which probably, you know, you can spend your time in better things, like helping the patients while reducing the time on some tasks, like, I don't know, segmentation tasks or things like that. Then they moved more to computer-aided diagnostics, so detection. And then if you want to move on the prognostic side, there it's still in the expectation side, I would probably say. So those technologies are in different part of that curve, in my opinion. But I believe there is more awareness right now on what to expect. I don't know if my co-panelist.
Dr. Enzmann, please.
Well, I kind of live my life by a few axioms. The most important thing for a patient and the healthcare system is the patient has to trust the healthcare system and has to trust the physician. So for AI to be ultimately accepted, there's a significant communication challenge that patients need to be in a position to trust AI. And that's probably going to come through their conversations with their physicians. And if the physicians trust AI, then the patients ultimately will. I also live by the axiom, you don't market something you can't deliver. So you have to be very careful about overselling something when in fact you can't deliver it. And I think also in terms of the trust part, I may be alone in this, but I think patients ought to be informed that if their image is being interpreted by a radiologist plus AI, the patient ought to be notified that the computer is in that loop in terms of interpreting the image. I don't think we're at a stage yet, although we may at some point get there, where only the AI program interprets the image, and that may be the case in some screening settings. But I think patients ought to know that the information that they're getting is partially derived by an AI program. But I think in terms of people who are marketing these products, you need to gain the trust of the physician, and that in turn will help gain the trust of the patient.
Dr. Sung?
All right. Yeah, so we actually had one of the first papers came out in the AI-based prostate cancer detection. And then after that paper came out, we have a couple of interviews, including Nature and other newspapers as well. The general audience, they're interested in whether the radiologist will be replaced or not. I think that was a theme of all the questions. We're trying to be careful not to be over-promising. That was 3-4 years ago. But since then, we're still working on it. I mean, just showing a proof of concept doesn't mean it's going to be useful in the clinical side. So it has a long way to go. I agree with Dr. Enzmann. And particularly, the trust from physician is a key. But a lot of situations, we as a developer, the tools are very much developing or the programmer-oriented tool, not the user-oriented tool. So it's very hard for the radiologist to understand what's going on, and or sometimes it's just a black box and then giving out the results. It's not going to be creating a good trust if that's the status. So definitely the AI tool needs to be improved. Particularly, the ongoing current theme is about explainable AI, interpretable AI. Those are the key components to improve the trustness of AI tools.
And Dr. Sung, sorry, please, Dr. Enzmann.
Well, I'll just make one more comment. As a chair, I obviously give some advice to my faculty. For my interventional radiology faculty, which is kind of our equivalent of a surgeon, I always give them some advice, and that is, don't try to hit home runs. If you're an interventional radiologist, if you do something great, people will say wonderful. But if you do something that's harmful, that won't be forgotten for years. So I think it's very important that you don't do harm, because that will be a very difficult barrier to overcome. It'll take years to overcome that problem.
So, Dr. Sung, maybe starting with you, what can we tell medtech companies about how they can engender trust in AI and radiology in both the physician side and the patient side? Because obviously you need to have everyone on the same page in order to move forward in this realm especially. So what do you think medtech companies can do?
Yeah, so for me, when I was using a self-driving car, when you actually turn on the self-driving option, if you don't trust the machine, it is actually more stressful because you have to watch over and then keep watching it until it fails. So it is actually a very tiring process, and then ended up I just turn off and drive myself, right? So that's also one thing I want to give you a lesson for that, because if the tool cannot give a trust issues, the physicians has to kind of keep watching on until it fails, and ended up it actually resulting it actually prolong or delaying their processes instead of enhancing their workflow. So that's one. Another thing is also self-driving. When you ended up having one mistake and then like the car is actually doing crazy stuff, you don't want to try again. Same thing here. I mean, if the tool provided wrong answer and then ended up creating huge problem, you don't want to try again. So the tool has to be really safe and making sure having some sort of safety guard, making sure that doesn't happen. So those two are very important. A lot of, I mean, including us, we're actually very much interested in technology development rather than those user experience and the workflow issues. But I think definitely workflow and the user experience is the very important things to consider if you really want to make the package that can be useful for a clinical side.
Yeah, Dr. Sung, I absolutely agree with that. And for those of you who know me, you know that I'm very much a proponent of human-centered design and human factors. And so I agree with that portion, and also helping people understand what actually the AI is doing, because I think that that's very important when it comes to providing such solutions. Dr. Codari, what are you doing in your startup that is potentially helping engender trust in physicians and patients related to AI and radiology, or what hurdles are you encountering right now in trying to disseminate your technology?
So one thing that I can say there has been a lot of effort is actually taking into account the human in the loop. So, you know, the technology, if you think only at the technology by itself, maybe you will develop the best algorithm ever, but then it will never be used because like you never took into account the human that actually need to use that. So, for example, we worked a lot in integrating our deep learning algorithm into a cohesive workflow that actually reflect the experience of the user, so that actually the user can benefit, not having like a random tool that it's like somewhere on their workstation, but it's something that it's like seamlessly integrated in what it's like the daily job of that person, because then it's not an interruption, it's not a deviation from, you know, the pathway of like, I don't know, reporting an MR scan, a CT scan, but more importantly in making the diagnosis, because the more interruption you're making, those are disruption. And the disruptions of the workflow don't help at the end. If not, they're making frustration. And so it's the opposite of what you want to do. So, you know, if you, like, ideally, you shouldn't even be, like, it should, like, be seamless. Like, you should know when it's applied, because, again, I totally agree that, like, building the trust past also, like, also informing, like, the patient of, like, the use of those kind of technology, because you build awareness, you know, around the use of the technology itself. So I think that at least in our case, there was a lot of work about like integrating the AI in a more complex experience that reflects the user need more than not only the technology itself. It's a shiny piece of a more complex puzzle, in my opinion.
Dr. Enzmann, any comments?
Well, I think everyone has made a basic point. This needs to fit into the workflow. It cannot add extra time to the workflow. It has to save time. You have to come up with, in the end, for an ROI for this particular purchase. One of them is time saved, and you can put a dollar amount on that. You do need to pay attention to how individuals actually look at images, how they interpret them. And you probably need to pay some attention to the design. So in fact, the information that the AI highlights is easily accessible, easily seen, and simple. Try to make it less complex. So it needs to be some attention paid to exactly the format of how the information is presented on top of the basic, you know, original image.
Great, thank you. So I think this is related to trust and making physicians and patients trust in the AI that's developed in radiology, but we can't talk about AI without talking about data. So I'm going to start with Dr. Enzmann because I know that he's very passionate about the data portion of this, and all of us are, but I want to ask Dr. Enzmann first, just talking about federated AI learning and your comments on that with regard to AI and radiology.
Well, I'm not sure I'd use the word passionate, but you know, I don't program myself, but it's clear that the quality of the MLDL algorithm depends on the training set. So in our department, we spend a lot of time making sure that we have highly curated data that actually trains the machine learning algorithm, and then obviously a good data set to test it. So I think spending extra time on curating the data training set is really important. As I can tell, best I can tell from everybody involved with that, it's not the most exciting thing that we do. In fact, I wouldn't say boring, but it takes a lot of extra work, but it's a critical step in actually coming up with a high quality algorithm. The other thing that we've worked on is, I live inside a firewall, and many academic medical centers live inside one firewall, maybe 2 or 3 different firewalls. It's clear to everybody that you need a larger data set for a good training of an algorithm. That can be a problem if you can't put it all under one roof. Now, Google may be able to put that under one roof, but many of us can't. So one solution for that is what's called federated AI, where multiple different data sets from different organizations, different sites, can be combined in a way that you end up with an algorithm that would have been trained on the entire set had it been in one location. So for those of you who live behind firewalls, I would look at federated AI as a partial solution to that.
Dr. Sung, any comments on data and how we can manage and share data?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of angles. Definitely, there are certain problems less susceptible or easier to create a data. For example, the segmentation is one of the examples that, like, the annotations and accessing to the data is relatively easier than something related to patient outcomes or diagnosis or the prognosis data sets. And generally speaking, those types of data set takes much longer time to accumulate. For example, Dr. Enzmann was talking about the department-initiated data set called integrated diagnostics. That started like 2010. So like it's been like 12 years. And then now we have ability to develop and evaluate those AI methods. So if you don't have that initiation and a long time before, and if you have a very short time scale, it's going to be a little bit challenging to tackle that types of problem. But in the meantime, I think the federated learning is one angle, try to do multi-institutional development and evaluations. And also the NIH is trying to push the AI developments because there are a lot of pressures from the outside US having AI development. So NIH is initiating so-called AI ML readiness. And then they're trying to put more publicly available data sets for the developer's perspective. So it will be coming up. I cannot promise it's going to be coming up soon, but it will be coming up from the government aspect as well.
Dr. Codari, any comments?
You know, like I think that like federated learning, it's a good option not only because you need a lot of data, and like I think we all agree that those are data-driven techniques. So the data drives the results. So you do not only need a lot of data, but you need heterogeneous data. Because at the end, what you want is generalizability. So you want to generalize well across different population. Because even if I build the best data set ever in one, like model ever in one center, then there is like the possibility of the population shift. And then I will not generalize that well, and then I will not use that like on a large scale. You know, that's what you want. And actually, federated learning allows to move the model instead of moving the data, so you bypass a lot of the issues that are actually related to data sharing. Because, or like country-specific regulation. You have the IPA, you have GDPR, so it changes also depending on the region where you are. So I think, and I think also the awareness on the industry, but also the regulatory agencies on like the rights on the data, this kind of stuff, it's building up. So this is an emerging topic. It's a very hot topic. But it's very important because those technologies depend on the data that they use. And it's like experience. The more case you see, the more you learn. And it's actually the case. But again, not only the quantity, it's also the quality and the heterogeneity that you can ensure in those data that makes the difference. And federated learning can be very useful for that. I agree.
So I know we don't have a regulatory expert on this panel, but I do want to talk about what the FDA wants to see when it comes to approving AI in radiology and what that means for companies that are trying to bring their technologies to market. Dr. Codari, would you like to start?
Yes, so you know, my role at Arterys started as being the head of clinical evidence. So I was collecting the evidence for our product, also related to regulatory submission. So I will say that what the agency want to see is that, of course, that you ensure, depends also like on which pathway you are going on. Like, are you the first of your category, so there is nothing to compare? There is something else that you want to compare to, so there is like already a predicate device that you want to match. So there is for sure performance, but there is for sure also what we mentioned before, not creating harm in any way, in any possible way, and putting the safeguards that actually, because at the end this is done for the patient. So I think it's in the interest of any regulatory agency to ensure that like no harm is done, and actually that anything that can be done to put in place those safeguards is done. So I would say that those are the two main. But also like actually that your performance reflects your claim. You know, the design of the clinical assessment that you're going to do depends really on your intended use, on your clinical claim. What are you claiming?
Right.
Then you have to provide evidence for that. So I think like these are the main areas.
Dr. Enzmann?
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize that last point. I'm involved with a startup that is working with the FDA. So number one, the FDA is learning. So depending on who your contact person is, you may have someone who's quite well educated and understands AI, and you may run into someone who's less educated. But I think the important common theme is, what are your claims, and can you prove that you actually are performing and delivering those claims? That seems to be kind of the common thread, regardless of the expertise of the FDA and investigator.
I agree that we are all learning, and that applies also to the regulatory agency. Probably something that was enough some years ago, it's not enough anymore, just because we have more knowledge about the potential bias that you can have in the assessments or like in the development. So there is more knowledge, more evidence that like it's building.
Dr. Sung, potentially you could comment on that, but also how important real-world evidence is. So you have your data set, you have your training set, you have your test set, you go in, you get FDA approval, and now you're out in the real world. At what point do you think potentially that there would need to be a reevaluation? Are we even at that stage of understanding yet when it comes to AI and radiology, and how often we need to update our approvals and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, as Marina was telling, one of the difficulties in medical imaging is imaging device is very different. And also the imaging protocol data collections are different. So there are a lot of data heterogeneities are in there. So without having clear understanding on those difficulties, just naive approach to develop an AI ended up creating something not that useful. So you have to be careful, and some sort of standardization and understanding of the domain of the particular imaging data set is a key here. In addition to the clinical problems and the data scientist components. So similar to what we discussed in the earlier morning about the investor meeting, they're talking about the team. Particularly here, you need to have a right team members in there and having a right expertise in there. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to go through the regulatory approvals and FDA approvals. And I agree. I think the FDA is also evolving over time. Actually, one of my students had an internship at FDA last year. And then, they're hiring the AI expertise, AI in radiology expertise, and then try to add more people there. So definitely it's an evolving entity. And to tackle the right way, like I said, the right team members with the right expertise in it is a key component here.
Dr. Enzmann, you're here acting as an advisor to startups, also developing your own AI algorithms, and also choosing what your radiologists are going to be using. What do you think changes when you have an AI that you've applied into practice with your radiologists and you start getting real-world evidence and applying it in a prospective setting? Do you see a lot of changes, and do you think that there's something to be said about getting some, regulated real-world evidence before widely applying AI?
So I view this as in the department as a long-term investment of making sure that I have at least a core group of faculty who understand this in the long term. So I formed AWAG, my AI working group, a group of young faculty that I'm training and I expect to be training over several years to be able to evaluate AI from the point of view is, again, what problem we're solving, what programs there actually address our problem, then actually running it in the department, and then implementing it in a workflow in a way that it works on a day-to-day basis. It's clear that for any AI program, the vendor needs to be prepared to install it at a site and let it run for several months to make sure that it actually works at that particular site. Mm-hmm. And then in our department, the AWAG has to come up with a criteria of, what does the AI program have to do for us to actually purchase it and to be able to, in our system, justify some type of ROI. I mean, these programs are not cheap. The business model is still, I think, in flux. But we need to be able to come up with measurements to show that when it is adopted, implemented, that it has a benefit. So we have developed our own AI program. It actually dates back a decade. It's been updated since then, but we implemented it. And the easy part actually was generating the algorithm. The hard part was actually implementing it in our system to make sure that everything communicates with everything else. And in particular, the end users, in our case, included non-radiologists. Radiologists are somewhat familiar with AI and are comfortable with it, but in our particular case, we had to train intensivists, ICU intensivists. So I would say that the last step, the last mile here at your home is probably the most critical one. And I would not underestimate how much communication it will take for you to be able to actually implement AI and having a run in your workplace without disrupting it. And be aware that it's not just radiologists that you will end up communicating with. You will have to communicate with other subspecialists, and ultimately you will be communicating either directly or indirectly with patients.
Thank you. Dr. Codari, any comments?
Yeah, I agree that, as we were saying before, even if you take the AI software as a whole, it's part of a more complex system, the IT system of the hospital. And on top of that, this IT system is used by different people that have a different relationship with technology. If we think about the radiologists are very close to technology because of their job, of course. But the more you move to more clinical specialties, the more the gap in the on how to use the same technique, it's large. And so in the same way in which you have to ensure that the people connect, I don't know, I'm thinking about a tumor board in which you have a lot of different specialties. You need your software to be able to interconnect with a lot of stuff, EHR system, APEX system. It must be integrated in the system. And that's a challenge because of course, if you talk with whatever company, it will tell you that the deployment, it's actually a challenging part of like the sales process because you have to talk with the IT, you have, it's, there is a lot of discussion there. Now there is like opening to cloud solutions, so that it's also like a different way of deploying, that it's taking more, like for example, we are completely cloud native. We always been, and so that's one of the different paths that you can take for trying to make the deployment a little bit like less a heavy lift for the IT. But yeah, it's a very complex system, and you need to ensure that your technology well integrates also with that.
Absolutely. Please, Dr. Enzmann.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, again, the trust point. As you know, healthcare is inherently risk averse. So I would not look at selling a product and hoping that one day you flip on a switch and it's up and running. It's going to require a slow rollout. And the time frame that, in terms of when you think you sell something and having it up and running, your initial estimate, I would double it, triple it, because that's probably how long it'll take for it actually to be functional in a working environment.
Thank you so much. I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions. Are there any questions in the audience? Over there?
Thank you. Are we on? Yes, excellent. So first, Dr. Enzmann, thank you for talking about workflow and ROI. That's an aspect of this conversation that doesn't get enough attention, I believe. So thank you for bringing that up. So the question I have is more of an organizational and cultural one. Matt Bean at UCSB a couple of years ago looked at how robotic surgery was impacting the training of residents, and finding that in the near term, operationally, the surgeons actually doing the procedures were more efficient, and they loved it, but the residents and the interns didn't get a lot of access now. They weren't able to stand around and retract and do all the simple tasks. And so the concern is that there's sort of a net impact on the generational training and transfer of experience. And so I'm wondering in radiology if anyone's thinking about a similar sort of situation where as you automate more and more of the process of doing radiology, if anyone's seeing any potential impact on the people coming up, subsequent generations.
You might be familiar with the work of an author named Rogers and Diffusion of Innovations. There are innovators, then the early adopters, and then the rest of the population. Our residents are asking for more education in terms of AI, so we're beginning to include it in our curriculum. It's still early, but there's clear interest. But as you know, with radiology, it's you have to do it. You're going to learn by actually performing either image interpretation or working with AI. So our approach will be is to try to expose our trainees, number one, to what I'll call a theoretical background, so they understand what an algorithm is, how it's generated. But then it's going to be actual hands-on training at the workstation using the AI. That's how they'll learn it. But I see a great deal of enthusiasm on part of our trainees. So I don't think they'll be left behind. It's a little bit different than robotic surgery where you have to have your hands on the device. In this case, as long as your eyes are on the monitor, you'll be able to learn.
Great. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm obviously speaking as a surgeon, so I have a lot of comments about surgery and the application of high technology there, but radiology is inherently a high technology field, and so I think that the application of additional technology will only enhance the training of residents and also the way that radiologists in the future can practice. But Dina is here telling us that we're all out of time, so thank you all very much. Thank you to all of our panelists, and I hope you learned a little bit about AI and radiology.